2 Samuel 19. We got into 19 a little bit last week, but we need to back up just a little bit. This is the situation where David has been kind of exiled from his own palace. He's been run out of Jerusalem, run out of the palace. He's been basically relieved of the kingship as far as all Israel and Judah are concerned. And his son Absalom had taken over, and Israel was part of the deal. They did it. They did it to him. They kind of let David go, and they took Absalom. I'll tell you, one of the things that struck me as I've been studying this and thinking about it is don't trust people. They're fickle. These people were all for David. Judah, the people of Judah were all for David. He's their family. Israel was all for David. Oh, yeah, God promised the kingdom to you. And now all of a sudden along comes this good-looking guy, Absalom, and they fall at Absalom's feet and they kick David out, and they even try to kill David. You're going to see tonight things kind of turn around because now Absalom's gone. And so as we get into this middle of chapter 19, you remember last time we talked about how David had been weeping and he was so upset that his son Absalom had died, and he allowed his feelings as a father to overtake his good judgment as a king. And he conducted himself in such a way that the army that came back after winning the battle were so embarrassed they kind of tucked their tail between their legs and walked into the city. Instead of to rejoicing, they walked into the sobs and the wails of their king over his son's death. The son who had tried to kill him, who had kicked him out of being king. And so now we're at a point where there's been another infraction, another problem between David and Joab. You'll remember that he's already been upset at Joab because he doesn't feel like he can control him. And Joab has killed Abner, as Abner was trying to bring all of Israel to come to David and be under his kingship, and Joab killed him because he felt threatened by him. And now Joab has actually killed the king's son. And although there is an aspect of that was good for David, as a father it was very bad for David, and David's got a grudge now against Joab. And so he has determined that Joab's not going to be the general of his army anymore. Joab's not going to accept that, and you'll see as it happens later on in our story tonight. So, throughout the tribes of Israel, chapter 19 of 2 Samuel, verse 9, it says, all the people are arguing. The king delivered us from the hand of our enemies. He's the one who rescued us from the hand of the Philistines. But now he's fled the country to escape from Absalom. And Absalom, and listen to this, whom we anointed to rule over us, has died in battle. Why do you say nothing about bringing the king back? So, the people are starting to talk. We don't have a king. We put this young guy in, and now he's gone. And so we've got a king, but he's out there. He's on the outside of the kingdom. We need to bring him back. Come on, guys, let's get this thing together. I don't know the time frame here. I do know that news traveled a lot slower in those days. We talked last week about the fact, there were no cell phones, there was no CNN, no Fox News, none of those things. Didn't even have the U.S. Postal Service. They didn't even have Pony Express. They did have runners, and runners would take the message, and sometimes they would have some people that would ride horses, but the news finally has spread throughout all the kingdom of Israel, and it may have taken a week, may have taken 2 weeks, but people are hearing, oh, Absalom, he was such a promising start, now he's gone. We don't have a king. We need a king. Why aren't we bringing it back? And notice that it's Israel that is first talking. Now, what you have to see here is that the writer is almost, in fact, already, he's foreseeing what's going to happen at the end of Solomon's reign. At the end of Solomon's reign, the 12 tribes split, and they become Israel, which is the 10 tribes in the north, and then Judah, which is the 2 tribes in the south, Judah and Benjamin. And this is kind of implied because now Israel is the one, they came and they made a contract with the king back 7.5 years after he began to be king. David had become king over Judah by an agreement, because they're his family. And then 7.5 years later, with a contract that was written with Israel. And now it's Israel who has come and says, hey, why aren't we talking about bringing the king back? So David sends word to Judah. He sends the two priests, Zadok and Abiathar, and he says, go to the elders of Judah and say, how come you guys are the last ones to talk about bringing me back? Well, think about this for just a moment. Amasa, who was the leader of the army of Absalom, was from Judah. Absalom, the new king, was from Judah. And so one of the reasons why Judah was reluctant to ask for David to come back, I think, is that they were embarrassed. They had put forward a new king, part of their tribe. David was part of the tribe, but so was Absalom. And they even had the army commander. He was from that tribe also. And so they were kind of, yeah, we don't know if we want to ask David back or not. I don't know who they were planning to have. But he finally sends a message to him. And it says that they finally were won over, verse 14, so that they were all of one mind. These people are so persuadable. And in my own personal reading, I'm actually up in like 2nd Chronicles and a number of kings down the road. And one thing I notice about the people of Israel is they are very, very influenceable. If their king is righteous and doing righteous things, they are righteous. And the more righteous the king is, the more righteous the people are. But the more wicked the king is, the more wicked the people get. There are people that were just very easily influenced. And so now Zadok and Abiathar have kind of gone into this vacuum of embarrassment, and they're saying, hey, guys, listen, he's our own flesh and blood. Let's bring him back. And so they're all convinced, and it says that they send word and said, come on back, king, you and all your men. That, to me, has the ring of, I don't know, there's something about that doesn't sound right to me. I don't know if it's just the fact that their hearts were so easily swayed one way or the other. Okay, yeah, we're convinced. Come on back. Where's the genuine sorrow on the part of Judah for having stood behind a king who was going to usurp the one that God put there? I don't see any sorrow on the part of Judah yet. Let's see if anything happens. Well, as David and his men are coming, and again, there may have been a couple of thousand, maybe even more, and this big movement is now coming back to the city, marching up the hillside, heading toward the gates of the city. And it says now that as they're, actually before they even got there, they got to this place called Gilgal, because they were on the other side of the Jordan. And before they got there, the men of Judah came to Gilgal and they met the king. And somebody comes out to meet him. Verse 16, Shimei. Do you remember Shimei? When David was running from Absalom, Shimei is the one that met him. He was cursing him. He's throwing rocks at him. And he's saying, hey, you're getting what you deserve. You're just a no good. Get out of here. You know, you deserve all this. And Abishai at that point wanted to kill him. David wouldn't let him. He said, maybe God told him to curse me. Well, now as he's coming back, he's the king. He's won the battle. The usurper's been killed. And now the king's coming back with all of his men. And who comes to meet him? Shimei. Because he knows he did something he shouldn't have done. That brings up to me a very important life lesson. Choose your actions carefully. You never know when you're going to have to back up on it. Another way to put it would be, you might want to choose your words carefully because you never know when you're going to have to eat them. You got to be careful. Don't just spit out things. This guy's out there and he's cursing David and he's saying things to him. And now, what's he doing? Look at him. He brings with him 1,000 Benjamites. And he brings also Ziba, the steward of Saul's household. He kind of joined the caravan. And look at this. They rushed to the Jordan where the king was. Well, no wonder. He deserved to be killed for the way he treated the king. And so now he's rushing out. He's taking care of the king. He's brought all these guys to help. They cross the ford and they take the king's household over to do whatever he wished. You can just imagine him walking up saying that, your wish is my command. How can I help you? How can I assist you? Well, the guys, and what gets me is that David, who should have brought judgment down swiftly on this guy's head, David doesn't. So Shimei crosses the Jordan, falls on his face before the king. May my lord not hold me guilty. Do not remember how your servant did wrong on the day my lord the king left Jerusalem. May the king put it out of his mind. For I, your servant, know that I have sinned. But today I have come here as the first from the tribes of Joseph to come down and meet my lord the king. Abishai is standing next to the king, and he's like, let me kill him. I think I've heard that before. Let me go over there and cut his head off. That was when they were on the way out. Now the guy comes back. Abishai hasn't forgotten. He's like, let me kill him. Let me take him out. That was Abishai's answer for most things. He was a warrior. I mean, what do you expect? But David says, what does this have to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah? What right do you have to interfere? David is really, he's more angry at Joab right now, and he's still nursing this thing. Joab killed his boy. Joab killed his son. And even though Absalom had killed his other son, he's now angry at Joab because Joab killed Absalom. And he's kind of taking it out on Abishai. And it seems to me, from what we see here in the text tonight, Abishai and Joab were never very far apart. And I'll show you how I see that later on. And even here, he refers to you sons of Zeruiah as though Joab is actually there. Joab has been demoted. He's not the general anymore. He's been knocked backwards. He's not the general in David's minds. But if you know anything about the military, a man who has commanded the respect of an army and then is removed by somebody who has political power over him doesn't necessarily lose the respect of the army. And you're going to see that in just a little bit with Joab here. He's been removed. Well, the king promises this guy Shimei, he says, listen, I'm king over Israel today. I understand that. It's almost like he's saying, listen, today's a day of rejoicing. I just got restored as a king. I'm not killing anybody today. Tomorrow maybe, but not today. Well, he does take care of him later, and we won't find this out. And just so you, in case you're not here or we don't get to the study in 1 Kings, when David's on his deathbed and he calls his son Solomon in, he says, Solomon, there's two things I need you to do. Number one, he says, don't let Joab die a natural death. Take him out. And then he said, secondly, don't let Shimei die a natural death. You'll know how to deal with it. And so on his deathbed, David says to his son, here's two pieces of unfinished business. I need you to handle it for me. And in fact, he does handle that. When you get into 1 Kings, you'll see that what happens there is there's another son, third son down the road. First was Amnon, and then Absalom killed Amnon, then Absalom rebelled. Well, then at the end of David's life, before David was getting weaker and weaker, and he never appointed a new king. So Adonijah, who was next in line, another good-looking young man, whose father never said anything to correct his actions, decided to get 50 men to run in front of him, and decided he was going to be king. And Joab went in with him. Abiathar the priest, who's been with David from the beginning of David's fugitive years, went in with Adonijah. The only persons that weren't included were Bathsheba and Solomon. And if you've read anything through the Kings, you know that quite often what happens when one king comes to power, if there's been any kind of concern about how they are going to stay in power, one of the first things they do is they kill off all their brothers and the royal family, so that they're the only ones that have the throne. And so what happened was David, he's sick, he's in bed, he's very weak, can't even stay warm. And Nathan the prophet hears what's going on. Adonijah's been anointed king. And David doesn't know anything about it. And so he says to Bathsheba, hey, listen, if you want to live, we got to do something here. So they kind of put together a plan. Bathsheba goes in, talks to the king, and says, didn't you promise me that Solomon, my son, would be king? Oh, yeah, yeah. Right then Nathan comes in and says, oh, king, did you say Adonijah could be king? I thought you said Solomon was going to be king. And so David takes Solomon and puts him on the throne. And then Adonijah, he lives. Well, Adonijah's allowed to live. And then one day he comes to the queen mother, Bathsheba, and he says to her, I have a request for you. Don't turn me away. She said, okay, go ahead, talk, I'm listening. He says, I want the last wife that King David had. She actually just kind of lay in bed with him to keep him warm. He was never physically involved with her. And he said, I want her as my wife. And so Bathsheba, not realizing what's going on, goes to Solomon and says, hey, I got a request for you. And he says, well, what is it, Mom? He said, I'll give it to you. What do you want? He said, she said, let your brother have Abishag. Well, there's some thought in the commentators that Solomon had already taken a liking to Abishag because she was actually his wife now. And he's like, Mom, why don't you ask for the kingdom for him too? Remember what I've told you about the wives of a former king, and whoever has them is the one that has the right to the throne? Adonijah was trying to push the issue again, and Solomon said, oh, that's it. He just sealed his death warrant, and he sends one of his men out. He says, go, take him out. So Joab hears what's going on. Joab runs into the tabernacle, and he grabs a hold of the horns of the altar, and he says to him, go. He said, take him out. And he said, King, he won't leave the tabernacle. He says, okay, kill him there. And so he takes out Adonijah, he takes out Joab. Well, then Shimei later gets what's coming to him because Solomon said to him, you can't leave the city. Build a house here in Jerusalem. You leave the city. The day you leave the city, you die. He lived there for 3 years. And then a couple of his slaves ran away to Achish, king of Gath, and he went to get him. He came back. Solomon said, come here. He said, what did I tell you? It's like these little kids. What did I tell you? I said, the day that you left, you're going to die. That's it. Down he went. So Shimei eventually gets what's coming to him. That's a long story. But so right here, David extended him his life. He got to live a little bit longer, but he does eventually get what's coming to him. And so Mephibosheth comes. Remember when David was leaving, Mephibosheth wasn't there. Mephibosheth is lame. He's the son of Jonathan. He's been living in David's house. He's been eating at David's table off and on. And he didn't come. When David left the city, he didn't come. And so Ziba lied about him. And so David gave all of the property that belonged to Mephibosheth to Ziba. Well, now Mephibosheth comes, and David says, where were you? Why didn't you go with me when I left? And here's his answer. He says, you know I'm lame. Ziba tricked me, my servant. I couldn't get on the donkey by myself, and I wasn't able to come. And so, what does the king do? Now, this puzzles me, because Mephibosheth sounds honest, and there's no reason for us to question Mephibosheth's loyalty to David. It is very unlikely that this humble child, young man, actually thought they were going to give the kingdom back to him. His own father, who would have had a tremendous influence on him until he was the age of 5, was somebody who knew that David was going to be the king. And Jonathan even said, you're going to be king, I'll be next to you. I don't see Mephibosheth as actually doing, I think Ziba lied completely. David had made a decision in a moment of duress, a moment of stress, and it was a decision that was a wrong decision. Brings up another point, a practical point. Don't make decisions. Don't make important decisions when you're under stress. It's usually not a good thing. If you're really upset about something, if you're overly tired, if you're feeling sick, don't make decisions. Just put them off. But you need to, no, I don't need to right now. I want to wait until I can think clearly. David was under pressure. He was running for his life, and he made a decision to give away everything that belonged to Mephibosheth. And as the king, he had the right to do that. But here now he says, okay, now what do you think David should do? Well, I think he should give it all back to Mephibosheth. That's not what happens. It says here, what say more? Why say more? The king said, I order you and Ziba to divide the land. What? Split it evenly? Are you kidding me? He lied. Ziba lied to get this, and now David's saying, divide it evenly. Well, there's a couple of things that are going on here. Number one is, it may be that David knew more about the situation than what we do in reading the text. It's very possible there was more information, and maybe Mephibosheth wasn't as innocent as he sounded. Another possibility is David may have felt uncomfortable with taking all of it away from Ziba because he had actually given it to him and he didn't feel like it was fair. I don't really understand that. Maybe there was some kind of a rule or a law back in those days that would limit this kind of a transaction. I don't know. But Mephibosheth's response tells me a little bit about what kind of person he was. Verse 30, it says, let him take everything. Now that my lord the king has returned home safely. He's like, I don't care. I didn't have it before I got to know you, and I don't need it now. He was living with the king most of the time. He didn't need all that stuff anyway. And so I like Mephibosheth myself. Well, Barzillai also comes. You'll remember Barzillai was one of the three guys who met David as he was running from Absalom, and he provided his needs out of his riches, out of the wealth of his own possessions. So Barzillai is he's come back, and now he's with the king at Jordan. He's about to cross, and notice he says Barzillai is old. He's 80 years old. And I'll never forget some of the things that are here. One of the first time I became aware of them was when I was working with a guy. He was one of the men at my church, and an older guy. He was in his 80s, and he was a pastor, in fact. And I was sitting down talking with him, visiting with him one day. We were talking about food, and he said, I can't taste things anymore. I can't taste anything anymore like I used to. And he was talking about how, he really couldn't appreciate music anymore because he couldn't hear that well. And I was a little bit surprised, and it may have been, he may have been the one that pointed this out to me. But look what Barzillai says. King says, hey, come live with me. Come on over. You took care of me when I needed you. Let me take care of you. Look what he says. Listen, he says, I'm 80 years old. Can I tell the difference between what's enjoyable and what is not? Can your servant taste what he eats and drinks? I never knew that was there until he pointed it out to me. He's like, he's going through this. Can I still hear the voice of male and female singers? Why should your servant be an added burden to my lord the king? I'll cross over with you for a short distance, but you don't need to reward me this way. Let me go home. I want to die in my own hometown. I want to die near the tomb of my parents. But hey, here's your servant, Kimham. And there is thought that this was probably his son. And so he says, let him cross over with you, and you can treat him however you want. Well, the king's like, oh, absolutely, come on. Kimham will come with me, and I'll take care of him as though he were you. And so they have a tearful parting, and the king crosses over. Kimham also goes with him, and all the troops of Judah and now half the troops of Israel have showed up. Now we've got tension building here, though, because in verse 41, it says, soon all the men of Israel were coming to the king and saying to him, why did our brothers, the men of Judah, steal the king away and bring him and his household across the Jordan together with all his men? I need to change my thing.